Good afternoon. My name is Jacob New, and you're listening to Companion Call on 1680 The Crow. Today, we are talking about women in sports media. The world of sports media can be a thoughtful, incredible space for interesting stories and passionate discussion. Simultaneously, there remain barriers and discrimination for women in the industry, whether they are working through a corporate ladder or making their own path in the realm of online content. I'm honored to have with me here today two guests. First, Georgia Twiss, one of the co-hosts of the popular Vancouver hockey podcast, The Broadscast, and Kaja Mae, a co-host of a local hockey sports post-game show, Game Over Vancouver. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
I'll start with the first question for both of you. What does it mean to you to be a woman that works in sports media?
I think for me, growing up, if I think about listening to sports radio, which I do often with my father, there weren't women on ever. Maybe they'd be the kind of in between they'd read the highlights or I can't remember what they're called, but those things where they'd read the scores or something, but there weren't really women on the radio. And so I think for me, just simply being there to represent a voice that when I was growing up wasn't there is something that's really important to me, no matter
how the Yotes got picked out of the ring.
For a lot of different groups, but specifically for me, for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of similar to that. Like, I grew up and there was no women unless it was, like, in between intermissions and stuff like that, where they'd have, oh, this is what's going on in, like, the other games in the league. They weren't, like, immediately on there. They weren't doing color commentary. They weren't doing pretty much anything on radio or anything else. So it's definitely been an interesting step forward, and as someone who's pretty new to this, it's definitely it's kind of like a welcoming thing, but it's also just like wow, there's still a lot more that should be done probably.
Yeah. On that note, you say, there's a lot more to be done. I think all of us have encountered people that may make assumptions that, things are better, but it's so much more important to specify that improvement isn't just an endpoint. When it comes to your experiences, what have you heard or read by others that proves there's such a long way for women to be treated equally in this industry?
Personally, it's any time that there's a female color commentator doing a game. On Twitter, I will see a lot of people being angry about, something she said, whereas if a male commentator said it, it would just be like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, it gets swept under the rug, whereas it holds up this woman's entire reputation. I kind of, personally related to that, because, anytime I try and talk about hockey or sports or anything with specifically, men my own age, if I'm talking in class, I'll kind of get brushed away because it's just like, oh, you probably don't know anything about it. But I'm just like, yeah, well, funny thing about that, I work in sports media a little bit, so yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think, I think one of the biggest problems, something that we often harp on about on our podcast, is that sports is still viewed through a male gaze, and it's still seen as this inherently masculine space. So any women who entered are transgressing. I think what Kaja said about the color commentators, or even someone like Leah Hextall who calls the games, the amount of vitriol that they get spewed at them is horrific. And I think that there's still a complication there in having the conversation of, okay, you can critique someone, and that's fine, and that's totally legitimate to do. But when you cross the line into really horrific, misogynistic, sexist, just disgusting stuff, and there was an athletic piece that was written recently where she went into it, and that's where you're like, okay, so women are there, but it's not tangible for them to be there long term, because it's not sustainable. Logging on every day and having people sexually harass you or give you threats, death threats, for just simply existing and watching a sport that you love, you're not gonna last. It's really hard for your mental health and your physical health. So I think those are the parts that I think people still don't understand quite yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talked about how there are those people in positions where they're in visible positions, and yet they'll be faced with a lot of, unfair criticism or ridicule. Yet, these equitable strategies are incredibly important. And, could you state, why they're so important then for people to actually see someone, a woman, do, whether they're doing color commentating or they're hosting a post-game show or hosting a female-centric hockey show?
I think it's just to know that you can do it, that there is a path there, and to have people also in the industry that can help you. Like someone like Carolyn Cameron supports our podcast, or people, like a variety of people that can reach out and also help you along the way and give you some lessons. People like Shireen Ahmed is like really important for doing that as well. So having people to pull you in. But I also think the other thing, sorry, this is going back to the last thing we were talking about, is the point that we need to push forward even further is that the women who are being represented right now are quite like feminine presenting. And I think one of the things that I'd like to see going forward in sports media is that the whole spectrum of femininity and how different women look, if they're fat, if they're queer, like whatever, that they're also getting represented in those spaces, which I think is what things like podcasts and kind of the ground up media is doing a lot better than the kind of corporate stuff. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I took us off on a different track there.
That's absolutely great. I know for some people that listening, they might know that both of our guests come from quite good education backgrounds, you being a teaching assistant and also with Kaja actually being a comm student. How has your education experience played a role in how you view sports and the opinions then that you have?
I've done a lot of research kind of based on how your identity is formed through different biases and stuff like that is what I've learned a lot about. And I kind of I grew up as a Canucks fan, so I grew up with the bias of they're the best. But then there's also other people grow up with other biases, of course, and one of the biases, like Georgia mentioned previously, it's viewed through a male lens. There's, around sports and sports media, it's very much still a boys' game. You can see it on TNT, I believe, was it? Just a few months ago, Paul Bissonnette saying that women only watch hockey because they find Tyler Seguin attractive, and why? I don't know. I just, it's still viewed through a male gaze, even through, the advertisements that are shown and everything. It's, all, F-150s and cars and stuff like that. We learn a lot about advertising and what's shown during prime time. So kind of how that is a dominant male view, so it kind of adds to this, women aren't specifically going to watch this. And it's kind of I don't know, you're trying to turn women away from this sport that, hey, they might actually like. Yeah,
there is also the criticism that comes from fans, when, in regards to that, the NHL had the hockey is not a soap opera comparison that both of you remember, but it's also good because then people that actually are fighting for equality and for that fair view that sport can be viewed in a female-centric way actually show. It's it's there, and it's because there's also the self-parody that hockey is a lot about drama that they didn't think it's all about the game or whatever. And as Georgia mentioned, there's so much vitriol that women face online when it comes to sports dedicated spaces. In your experience, I know both of you have I guaranteed experienced the misogyny of that. Over the last maybe year or year and a half, have you seen it, increase, decline? What do you think is the trend that you've seen so far in the misogyny that you face in those areas?
So when we first started the podcast, the first year was horrific. There was a specific moment where one of the hosts on the podcast was very upset about Elias Pettersson going on spitting chiclets and spoke out about it. And that really just kind of upkicked a lot of just horrible DMs, really bad kind of Twitter bot accounts and stuff. And that was really, really hard for us to go through. I left Twitter for 6 months. and I posted like a whole diatribe of like the messages that I was receiving. And when I did that, I actually got a really good response from the local media that were like, this is really bad. Like, what are we doing? And I think that because they did that, when I did come back, and also like I blocked and muted a lot of these accounts, but it hasn't been as bad for me at least. But I also stopped talking as much about controversial topics. You feel yourself kind of self-edit so that you avoid getting that stuff. Because once you enter into the arguments over whether it's getting really into the nitty-gritty of the Hockey Canada situation or the Mitchell Miller situation that you're seeing now, that's when you get the really bad stuff. And so I find sometimes that I just go, I gotta step, I can't do this one. And that's really sad. But it's just kind of the life when you're kind of deciding as a woman if you want to speak out about anything. Like, this isn't just sports specific. This is just about being a woman online in general, I would say. But that's at least for me how I've experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of relate to that with like the whole self-editing and kind of monitoring what you say and stuff like that. I try not to get into like controversial topics, or if I do end up posting something and then somebody responds, negatively with like misogyny or homophobia or stuff like that, it's definitely hard for me to not like address it. But I don't know, if something really grinds my gears, makes me mad, I'll just shoot it off to my friends in DMs, because I'm like, I don't want to get attacked for believing what I believe. And I don't, I feel like I shouldn't be attacked for, having an opinion, like many others do, but that's just the reality that I live in.
Mm-hmm. That forced tendency to self-edit what you put out online, it's not fair that women should be forced to go through that. How would you say is a way that you can fight back against that? It's difficult because there's so many mobs of, random people on Twitter that, take that take a position and, just be like, I can spew whatever I want. And Twitter as a platform, sides with them, ironically. I've gone through, I'll try to report, different things, whether it's misuse of language for slurs, and Twitter just gets back and they're just like, we don't consider it a violation of our terms. You mentioned that you don't, Georgia, you mentioned that you don't tweet as much.
Yeah.
On that. What would you like to see in terms of, being able then to speak out without having to face that vitriol? Like, would it be better terms of service, or at least better application of, saying this is wrong, this is hateful, this is inappropriate? Or do people just need to as a group, police ourselves better and saying, no, we don't take that for you to just say, XYZ about this person because they have an opinion about a random hockey player?
Yeah, I think the thing that really started to wear me down was I started to feel like I was being annoying talking about it by being like, hey, this person said they want to rape me. Can you guys do something about it? Because you're the one who's getting the messages, but you're the one who's having to put it up for other people to kind of step in. And I kind of started being like, I don't want to keep doing this. This isn't fun. And then I also feel like I'm going crazy being like, is it actually that bad? No, it is really that bad. It's really that bad. But when you get to that point, and I think the issue, the good and the bad about Twitter is that something like Twitter, just to speak about that platform in general, is you are able to broadcast to a large number of people. People are able to, access you in anonymous ways for their own safety. I definitely think that there's reasons why people don't want to have to verify everything about themselves, and I understand that. But the downside is that is what happens. And I do wish that Twitter was better with stuff. There's still accounts that are using photos of me that are in existence. The account, they can't use the account anymore, but it still exists. It's still there. And can you just take that down? This doesn't seem like it's that complicated to do. But it's just this kind of it's kind of spun out of control for a lot of people. I know, like for me, I have all my like filters on for like whose replies I see. So I don't even respond to people's replies anymore if I don't know them. And that's kind of, you kind of do have to build your own like defense and safety tactics, unfortunately, because they don't. And I actually don't know how they could at this point. I mean, not that Elon Musk is really going to step in right now, but yeah, I don't think that there's a way.
Mm-hmm. To conclude our show today, I would love to hear from both of you. What are the things that, people that enjoy sports, whether they're casual fans or hardcore fans, can do to support women that want to, exist and state just simple opinions in the industry? What would you like to see? If it was one thing that you could say to people that enjoy sports to support women in sports media, what would it be?
Stand up. Like, if you see vicious hate towards somebody and it's a public forum, or if you see somebody that's intentionally being hateful, or just in general, if you see a woman in sports media doing an awesome job, step up, promote it. I just see a lot of people saying horrific stuff online, and then no one is defending the person they're attacking, which is fault, but a fault of our society for being afraid of conflict. But just stand up for people having basic human rights to have an opinion, or that it's not hurtful to others. I feel like I should emphasize that.
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple of things. I think like let's just take the broadcast for example. Like, you don't have to like what we do. I'm not asking. I'm not saying you have to like what I do, and if you don't, then you're a misogynist. It's just you have to accept that we have the right to have an opinion and do what we want, and say the kind of things we do, and watch sports in a certain way that we want to, which is through a subverted gaze. We're not doing it through the male gaze, but like accept that that's just a different way of watching sports, and just don't police how women watch sports or interact with it. And then the second thing is, I'll say, like, men need to do a better job about calling out their friends, because like a woman can say like, don't do that, but it's more powerful when it comes from another guy sometimes. And so just like learn how to call in your friends. It doesn't have to be like super attacking, but it can just be something simple. It's like, hey, not cool, like don't do that, or whatever. And that's kind of what we need to have happen. Like, we all have to do it, because Kai and I can scream about this as much as we want, but until kind of everyone's pulling at the same rope, then it doesn't really go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that should put a wrap on our conversation. I want to thank both of you for coming on, Georgia and Kaja. I think we've had a great conversation about what people should recognize about the situation that women have in sports media, and what simple ways they can do to help support them. To wrap up Companion Call, I'm your host, Jacob New. My producer in the producer's booth is Kiara Collinge. And thank you for listening. Have a lovely day.